meeting, and it appears as though we have only one visitor signed up for tonight. And I would ask Mr. Frank Holloman to step forward for his 3 minutes before the board. Yes, sir. If you would turn on your mic, and we will begin as you do with the timer.
Well, let me apologize in a way for being the only one. I read in the newspaper this morning that there was a public hearing. Nobody has asked me to come to talk, no organization. I've just come as a citizen because in my work and otherwise, I always encourage people to do that. And I thought, well, if I don't do this, I'm sort of a hypocrite. So here I am, and I came to support your proposed tax increase as a taxpayer and a citizen. As you all, some of you know, we have 3 children, all of whom graduated from the Greenville school system. We have a grandchild who will enter the system this fall. And I think this is critically important for 3 reasons. One is we do not compensate our teachers, principals, and administrators as we should. And if we're going to have quality education, we must have quality people. And more than having quality people, perhaps, we have to show respect and honor the people who play this important role. The second point I would make is that we think of ourselves justifiably as a great place. But if we're going to be a great community, we also have to have great schools, and the essential to great schools are having great people in them. And part of having great people in them is being willing to pay for that. And we should not only adequately compensate our teaching professionals to whom we entrust the future of our children, but we should really be the leading place for educational professionals to want to come, not only in our state, but in the region. Just think, if we're going to be a great place, that's essential. And the third point I would just make is, which is the most important point to me, it's the right thing to do. I mean, who are we if we're not willing to pay adequately and honor the people who perform the most important roles in our community? And those were the points I wanted to make. I thought there might be people on the other side, so I'd be sure I'd be sure to have a voice. But in any event, thank you very much for what you do and for being willing to take what I know is always a political risk to ask people to pay for what we value. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holloman. We very much appreciate your time. Seeing there are no additional speakers, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
A second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those no. And we are adjourned, and we will return for the second reading of the budget at 6:30. Thank you.
How you doing? Have a good.
Welcome everyone to the second reading of our budget, and I will turn the gavel over to Dr. Royster.
Thank you, Dr. O'Connor. Just briefly to give some context for the budget, and then to review the one slight change in the material since you had it at first reading, and then certainly any questions that you all have that you might want to ask about it. It's always good for us to go back and, as context for the budget, look at where we are as a district. Absolute rating of excellent on annual district report card. $128 million in college scholarship offers to the class of 17, and we have every reason to believe that in the next couple of weeks that we'll have a new number to post there that will be an increase over that $128 million. Average ACT score for our college-bound students consistently exceeds the state average. Our average SAT score by GCS college-bound students above the state and the national average. Increasing numbers of AP tests being given and increasing numbers of passing scores, that is a 3 or better, being attained by our students. This past year we had 30 National Merit Scholarship semifinalists. We outperformed the state in science and social studies at all grade levels on SC Pass in 14, 15, 16, and 17. Slightly more than 94% of our schools earned ratings of excellent, good, or average on the school report card. We've had a 531% enrollment increase in career and technical classes since moving those classes to the high school campuses. Our graduation rate, 87.3%, is up nearly 15 points since 2012. 5 subgroups outpace the district rate of improvement, and all are at or above 78%. You see there those subgroups with increases of 20 points, 19 points, 22 points, 17 points, and 17 points. A little review of where we spend our money in the budget. The FY18 budgeted expenditures. Teachers and instructional aides account for $344.3 million of our budget. All other employees around $195 million of our budget, and all other expenditures almost $54 million. So obviously the vast majority of the expenditures within our budget are direct instruction to students in the classroom in the forms of teachers and aides. And of course those other employees necessary to support those things done by teachers and aides within the classroom. You'll see there our budgeted expenditures in the all other category, and you have that in front of you, I believe, in your board materials and in your printed materials, and it's probably a little easier to read from there than from the screen, but you'll see instruction and instructional support, technical and data processing, district support, fixed cost, transportation support, maintenance support, and payments to charter schools. Most importantly, if you look to the graph to the right side, you'll see that almost $54 million accounts for only 9.1% of the district's general fund budget. Again, the vast majority of our investment in our budget are on those people that provide instruction and support the provision of instruction to our students. You see there a short explanation of each of those budgeted expenditure areas. FY19, summary of recommended expenditures, a little over $13 million in employee compensation. That employee compensation involves a step increase for all those teachers entitled to a step, a 1% adjustment to each step, resulting in an average increase for teachers, average teacher increase of a little over 3%, a 2% increase to all other employees not paid on the teacher salary schedule. You see an additional $7 million in increased cost for our side, for the employer side of health and retirement contributions for our employees, payments to charter schools, increases associated with student growth. It is a challenge to have growth, but it is a problem that we certainly prefer to have rather than a stagnated population, or certainly more so than a student population that decreases. Special education personnel costs associated with funding reductions. Mulch to ensure that our playgrounds are safe and in compliance with ADA. Again, Adobe licenses to ensure ADA compliance for our websites. The first year rollout of the Rudolph Gordon expansion to include the middle school grades with the 6th grade. That's additional personnel necessary to operate the additional grade level at the school, and also the base personnel for operating the expanded program there. You'll see some slight increase for the next 2 years in that category, likely not to the level of the year one. The first month or so of a salary for a principal for the new Fountain Inn High School to provide the opportunity for us to look for that person at the prime time to look for principals in the late winter, early spring, to ensure that person is in place for the opening of Fountain Inn High School in 2021, because there's, as you all know, an awful lot of work to be done to prepare the program, both the curricular and extracurricular program at that school. Special education teachers, A 10.0 FTE, a continuation of a recommendation that we've made previously that you all have supported in past budgets, excuse me, in an effort to ensure that as many special education students as can be taught in their home-based assigned school are taught in that location. In addition to the convenience of being in their neighborhood, it also offers the opportunity to be with students that they will later be in school with in subsequent years, and certainly much more convenient for parents where they have siblings that may be attending a school in the attendance area while their other sibling is attending a special needs program in another school. Additional therapists to provide direct services to special education students, and special education curriculum procurement and professional development for special ed and general education teachers dealing with improved services for our special ed students, whether in a general ed classroom or in a special needs classroom. Moving into an area that relates directly to improved and enhanced safety and security for our schools, one of the things that has been a common theme when we've talked with students, with parents, with teachers, has been the concern that students have a person to go to in the school, an adult connection with that school, to assist them in overcoming challenges and problems they may have. So the addition of 12.0 FTE guidance counselors to move from a 300-to-1 ratio to a 275-to-1 ratio at the middle and the high schools. Step one of what we would envision to be a two-year, two-step phase-in of going from 300 to 275 to 250. Quavar Music Subscription is a music curriculum that our teachers have used for a number of years. It has previously been funded by the state, and the state dropped the funding for that this year to eliminate the funding. Supplemental instructional material, $172,000, and band instrument repair, $5,000. The GATE program, $188,000 to ensure that we can sustain at the same level. We put that in there. We were not aware that we would receive a grant for the continuation of GATE. We did receive this past week notification of a grant in the amount of $100,000. So if you look in your budget material, you'll see that as a blue note in that explanation with the GATE increase. And what we would propose to you is to leave the budget at $188 and use the additional $100,000, since it is a grant, to over the next year or two, as we have people qualify, add participants to the GATE program instead of using that to replace part of the $188,000. Because we're not assured that that won't be one-time funding. In fact, we're only assured at this point that it is one-time funding. And we believe that the best use at this point in the budget process would be to expand that program to some additional participants as they become available to us. Career and technical education work experience compensation, as you remember, we've talked about that, the amount of $200,000 to provide for our career and technical instructors that come from an industry background to allow them credit for their industry direct related experience as part of their teacher salary, in the same way that we recognize teachers' experience when they come to us from other districts if they have taught multiple years. That also makes us competitive with the districts around us, because the districts surrounding us in the upstate give credit to their career and technical industry-based teachers in this same manner. An ETS applications analyst for $104,000. An additional item directly related to safety and security of our students, an increase of a little over $1 million to expand the zone patrol coverage by reducing the geographic area of the patrol zones and decreasing the number of schools and individual patrols, thereby increasing the frequency of patrols and the amount of time they're in the 63 some odd locations that do not have school resource officers. An additional $100,000 for criminal background checks for district volunteers, again directly related to safety and security. Though it does not have a budget impact, as a reminder, we left up there the itinerant mental health counselors that we're going to fund through federal Title 4A funds to ensure that I believe around 20 locations that do not currently have a mental health counselor on site will have the services of a mental health itinerant counselor. Again, directly related to safety and security of our students. The next item is as well for safety specialists to ensure that we are adequately and fully monitoring our compliance with all of our safety plans, the drills that need to be conducted, and individuals who will be able to provide on-site training at various school locations to help enhance safety and security in our schools. Salute to Education, Teacher of the Year, and retirement banquets, recognizing the increased cost of that, not desiring to pass on any additional cost to the attendees. And the last item is a net positive to the general fund budget, and that's a transfer of an additional portion of employer benefit liability from the general fund to the district's food service fund. Those are the items totaling a little over $27 million in the administration's recommended budget. The impact of that to an individual with a 2006 Honda Accord is 6 cents a month, but if you have a 2018 Honda Accord, the impact is 76 cents a month. We use those vehicles in those ages simply because those are two of the three most popular vehicles in the United States. Honda Accord, a Ford F-150, and I believe now third is a Toyota Camry replacing the Ford Taurus. But the average age of a privately owned vehicle in the United States is 11 years. So we use an 11-year-old car, but we also use a comparison with a new car. You'll also see the impact to three different businesses: a locally owned pharmacy with a value of $600,000, a machine shop with a value of $460,000, and a restaurant, with a value of $316,000, and the monthly impact to each of those businesses. And as we all know, but it's always good to be reminded of it, there is no tax levy on owner-occupied homes for school operating purposes. So history of the Education Finance Act based student cost. Mr. Knotts, do you have anything to add?
No, sir. You did a very good job.
Well, thank you, Mr. Knott. And I'll close out my presentation with simply saying that we are certainly here to answer any question that you have about any aspect of the recommended budget or the budget in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Royster. Mr. Knotts, was that I'm not quite ready to add anything yet, or did you say you would like to at this time?
No, ma'am. There's really nothing to add to
Okay.
Dr. Royster's presentation.
All right, then at this time, we will accept questions or comments by board members. Mr. Suddeth?
Help me to understand on special ed. We are going to have to spend $3,733,000. Is this on things that special ed used to do, but now the federal government or the state does not want to do it, so we're doing it?
That is a significant portion of that, yes, sir. The one thing that is not directly related to less revenue for special needs students would be the decision to move those classes closer to or into their home-based school. That is in keeping with the spirit of the IDEA Act, but it is not a requirement. It is not directly related to a reduction in federal funding or state funding.
So we're moving, Dr. Royster, the classes to the home-based school. We're going to have to add 10 additional teachers to accomplish that.
Yes, sir, the equivalent of 10 teachers.
Are these things here going to be yearly occurrences?
Yes, sir. Once that's in the budget, that would become a recurring cost unless for some reason our special needs population were to decrease. But it parallels the increase in our student population, so that has increased every year for a number of years now.
Is that going to be a higher reoccurring thing we've got to look at?
Yes, sir. Basically, any personnel cost is always going to end up being a slightly increasing cost each year as those individuals qualify for additional pay based on moving a step on the salary schedule or whatever increase is accorded to teachers. And there has been, for the last several years, an increase in cost and fringe benefits for employees.
Okay. We want to raise the millage 5.1 mils.
Yes, sir. That amount equals the amount that the state has advised us equates to the increase needed to meet inflation and population growth.
We've got 3.5 mils. If we don't use, we'll lose.
Mr. Knotts?
That is correct.
And so we're going to have an additional, what, 1.6 mils?
Yes, so the difference between the 3.5 and the 5.1.
3.25 and,
Excuse me, 3.5 plus additional 1.6 mils brings up to 5.1 mils per the state's formula.
what? In looking back over what we've done in the last couple of months, we have taken how much money out of our reserve fund?
Mr. Knotts?
Let me ask this, Mr. Knopp. I was looking, and in March, we took 4.2 million out of the general fund to fund safe, efficient transportation and school security. We spent $4,185,000, and we said there that was to take it out of the fund balance to fund 4 items related to safe, efficient transportation and school security. The next month, we take out $3 million out of the general fund to deal with the enhancement of school capture area security. Is that just for that one item only? We're going to spend $3 million to enhance school capture areas?
That would be spent at a number of schools, like you said, to enhance the school capture areas in those schools. That relates to the $3 million that you referenced. That would be coming out of the general fund balance.
And each of those are non-recurring expense items, except the amount to maintain the increased zone patrols through the end of the year. And this item in the general fund recommended budget of around $1 million is to carry that forward on a permanent basis.
How did our general fund get so rich? We just spent in the last 2 months $6 million.
I'm assuming you're referring to the general fund balance. Actually, the fund balance is right in line with recommendations by the Government Finance Officers Association and other academics and other business industries as far as the fund balance amount. We are conservative in our budgeting for revenues, and we are conservative in our budgeting for expenditures. And every year, when we underspend the general fund budget and maybe receiving a little bit of additional revenue in the general fund budget, that is added to the fund balance. It then allows the board to approve these one-time activities that you just referenced. As far as it being rich, I'd want to say it is right in line with recommendations, and that also helps us maintain our credit ratings with Moody's and Standard & Poor's.
why can't I take the 1.6 mils out of the general fund balance instead of having to put that 1.6 mils to the taxpayer?
The 1.6 mils will help us fund recurring items. And we generally use, not generally, we use the general fund balance to fund items that are not recurring. That the expenditures may occur over a period of time, but they will not recur on an annual basis, such as the two items you just mentioned a couple minutes ago. So to use a fund balance in place of the 1.6 mils will be using a fund balance to fund recurring items in the general fund.
If I took the 1.6 mils out of the general fund, would we still have a viable general fund balance?
Yes, sir.
And I guess our concern with looking at the fund balance for recurring expenditures is, if in fact that is a recurring expenditure, you are simply deferring until a later date the need to increase revenue to meet that recurring cost. And if you defer it to a later date, it likely will have an increased cost to it, but at some point, because it's recurring, then you have a need to identify a recurring funding source for it. So we've tried to be very cautious in utilizing and recommending to the board the utilization of fund balance only for items that are non-recurring. That's why you rarely see non-recurring items appear in our general fund budget, because we've made a practice in the last several years of coming back to you in the fall to utilize fund balance or revenue in excess of expenditure from the previous year to buy things that are non-recurring in cost. And it is a good bit of money, but it's a good bit of money because 1% of our budget is a large dollar figure. But we want to be extremely cautious in estimating revenue, and we want to be very cautious in expending our budget that we're not inside the 1% in either direction, because once you get that close to the line, you could very easily overspend your budget, or you could very easily overestimate your revenues. And that's what has occurred in a lot of districts that we have made note of in recent years, where they've ended up with $5, $6, $10, $12, $18, $20 million revenue and expense issues and budgetary problems, because in some cases they appear to have not watched very cautiously their expenditures, and in other cases may have overestimated their revenues. So as a general rule, although we did do it during the economic downturn, we don't advise using fund balance for the funding of recurring items, because if you do it for long enough, again, it compounds your recurring cost, and our bond rating agencies would begin to look at that negatively, and it would likely affect our bond rating, which affects the interest rate that we have to pay for the bonds that we issue.
The only thing I'd say to that, we spent $7 million, and that didn't affect our bond rating. And I'm looking here at,
No, sir,
excuse me, the zone patrol security officers, 1.7 million. Is that recurring or non-recurring?
that's recurring.
All right.
I believe it's
So we gotta spend that every year.
$1,070,000. Yes, sir. There are no non-recurring expenditures that we've recommended in your general fund budget, unless there's something you choose not to continue to do.
The 4 safety specialist,
Yes, sir.
who came up with that?
That actually came out of some of the conversations that we had with the teacher group. In fact, their first suggestion was to have one in every school, but that's not, that certainly wasn't practical or within reason. It seemed like a good suggestion. We had further discussion about it, and what seemed reasonable to us was to have one regionally for each part of the county to ensure that we're keeping up with all the drills that we have put into place to ensure safety of our students, that our schools are fully and adequately maintaining the procedures that we have in place for safety and security, and to help principals provide training to their faculty and staff in areas of safety and security.
How would they help in dealing with the active shooter response plan?
The single, I think, immediate greatest impact they would have is ensuring that we are properly conducting drills, to be on site to evaluate those drills when they're done, and to provide feedback to the principal and to the school as to how well they're doing those drills. And we do not currently have the personnel to do that at all 84 schools.
I don't really understand how these 4 people are going to be in 102 schools. They're going to be in all elementary, middle, and high schools?
Yes, sir. We would assign them geographically, much the same way we do custodial specialist and maintenance master foreman, where they would be serving about 25, 26 locations apiece, which makes it manageable for them to get out into those locations multiple times during the school year.
So we're paying the safety specialist what we're paying these other people, like custodians, supervisors.
I wouldn't say exactly, but it would be similar to that. It depends on the background and experience of the person.
What's the thought on teacher pay? It seems to be that this state is beginning to focus on teachers and what we're paying teachers. And the last thing I saw in the newspaper was they were comparing our school district to other school districts, and we were doing very well, I think, with the exception of Charleston. They were probably doing a little bit better Charleston than we was for our teacher salaries. So I'm wondering, do you foresee any problem with our teachers and they're wanting an increase in salary? Well, than what they normally want.
Well, we're in the top five in the state now. We believe that with the recommendation that we've made to you in this budget will allow us to remain in the top 5. Perhaps it might allow us to move up a little bit, but we believe it will allow us to remain in the top 5. And we certainly want to be at the top of the state when we're seeking teachers. And that is rapidly becoming the number one thing that teachers cite when they talk about leaving the profession. And when individuals talk about whether they're going into the profession or not, they are more and more citing pay as a reason not to go into the profession and a reason to leave the profession. So what we've recommended to you in this budget, we believe allows us to stay at the top of the state. I believe in future years, the top of where the state is now is not going to be adequate to continue to attract quality teachers into the classroom. So I think more is going to have to be done there.
Did we not at one time compare with our southeastern region and what they were being paid?
Yes, sir, that's a good point. At one time, the state committed to reach the southeastern teacher salary average, and I don't know where we stand right now. Ms. Thomas and Mr. Knotts can probably tell us, but the state has dropped some from that competitiveness with southeastern average. You have that, Ms. Thomas?
The southeastern average is 49,363. We are at 51,213.
We are.
We are.
The state is below the southeastern
The
average.
state is below at 48,769.
We're above it because obviously we pay above the state minimum. But if they were to move the state minimum to meet the southeastern average, then obviously that would also move ours. What's that about? What's the difference between southeastern average and state average? 1,000. Roughly move us $1,000 if the state went to the southeastern average again.
From everything that I see, the problem we were going to have with teachers is we need to pay them more.
Yes, sir.
All right, if I look at these 1.6 mills, what is that for? Is that for safety or is that for other things as well?
Well, we don't break it out that way. We look at the total package. And the total amount that comes to the need for the 5.1 mills, it's a combination of all those things. It's teacher pay. It's increased need for special education services for students. It's our desire to increase and enhance safety and security for our students. All those things added together come up to create a need for about $27 million in increased expenditures, and we lack, when we look at the revenue we have coming in from the state and from the increased value of a local mill, then we're still 5.1 mills short of meeting that $27 million. So we don't tie any particular mill or any particular revenue to a particular expenditure other than the money that is sent to us for a designated purpose, which would be the money from the state for teacher salary and the money from the state for increased cost of benefits, neither of which is sufficient to pay 100% of the cost of either item.
Who came up with the zone patrol security officers?
Who came up with the idea originally? That was my idea in conjunction with the folks at Enforcement and Investigations.
All right. How much additional would that provide security for, I assume, our elementary school, since we only already have an officer in middle and high school?
The 63 locations, which do include the 51 elementary schools, but there are a total, if I remember correctly, 63 locations that do not have a school resource officer. Career centers, Fine Arts Center, Child Development Centers, Sullivan Center. There are a number of other locations besides the elementary schools.
Do we know that what we're paying for this year as to how frequently they are at each school?
Yes, sir.
And if they're going to add $1 million, what percentage is that going to increase?
We don't like to publicly discuss the number of visits per day, but that substantially increases the number of visits per day, and it substantially decreases the number of locations for which they're responsible.
Give me an idea of what substantially means.
Mr. Sudduth, if you would like to get those particulars, it would be fine for you to request that we go into executive session for that, but he's mentioned that he really doesn't want to talk about that in public to say the precise number or anywhere close to it of visits per school, but I'm happy to entertain that motion for executive session if you'd like to get more detail about that.
I don't personally think that's an executive session motion, but that's just me. I'm not asking for anything specific. I'm asking just for what is substantial. And substantial can be in the eye of the beholder. But no, I don't want to go into executive session to look at that.
I think that I understand you're asking for kind of a capacity question more than the specific details. And Dr. Royster, if you feel that you can answer that any more completely, please do. But if not, we can leave it there.
It will decrease their responsibility by 30% or better.
Okay. The problem I have with the millage, I can understand the 3.25 mills. If we don't use, we'll lose. But the 1.6 mills, I would agree with that. If it had not been, we've already spent $7 million in the last 2 months on something that we consider as, and I've heard spoken about many, many times, that our fund budget is something we need to take care of. But, you know, I can't vote for this millage increase. I can vote for what if we don't lose. If we don't use, we'll lose. But I don't see why we can't take the 1.6 mills out of our fund balance. So I'll vote no on the recommended budget. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sudduth. The next speaker we have is Ms. LaVentus Wells.
Thank you, Madam Chair, I appreciate the floor. Dr. Royster, when we have areas that are no longer in place, what happens to that recurring line item or items that pertain to those areas that are no longer in existence that were, and they were on that reoccurring? What happens to that funding?
If there were an example of that this year, you would see it translated up there like you saw that last number,
Yes.
where we would show a return to the general fund. I was trying to think of a recent example. There have been several in the last few years. Mr. Knox, can you think of an example?
The largest one for this year was when the charter schools left us, and we show a reduction in the expenditure of $8.6 million.
In the current year
In the current
budget.
year for FY18. That was an item as far as an expenditure we no longer incurred, that allowed those funds to be reassigned.
And where were they reassigned to? Because that's $8 million.
To the proposed FY18 general fund as a whole. We didn't come back and say, well, take this $8.6 million and fund these particular items. That allowed us to fund the items that we recommended to the board for FY18.
And is that in this budget?
It's in the base general fund budget.
Yeah, because this year's budget is really no different from the last several years. We really don't bring to you non-recurring items for funding. We try to do those by bringing you a recommendation to utilize fund balance for non-recurring. So the majority of last year's expenditures, the year we're in, the budget we did last spring, they would have all been recurring items, and the largest ones would have been salary increases and would have been increased cost for employer benefits, increased cost for the employer side of retirement, increased cost for the employer side of insurance.
And were those not covered before?
Yes, but they increase every year.
Okay, so now my question is, why should my constituents support this tax increase, especially with the constituents that no longer have children in school?
I guess kind of the short version of that to me would be, while it is a tax increase, it's an investment in what we're doing. And it's an investment in economic vitality of our community. It's the first thing that people look at when they look to move here and make economic investment. It's the first thing. They want to know what's the workforce educational level in the community, and they also want to know what are the educational opportunities for me and for my family if I come here. So it has to do with economic development. It has to do with having the kind of community we all want to live in. Because if you look at all the factors that make a community the kind of community you want to live in, that is one with a low crime rate, one that has a low incidence of substance abuse issues, one that has a high income level for individuals. If you look at all the positive attributes of a community, they're all can be directly related to the educational level of the population. The greater the educational level, the fewer negative factors you have, and the more positive factors you have. So while it is a very modest tax increase on someone that owns a business, somebody that has a car, it is an investment in having the sort of community that I think we all want to live in. And the entire system of public education, which I think we all believe is a cornerstone of the kind of society we have, but more importantly, as far as funding that, at least in the state of South Carolina, it's designed to be a state and a local system. And for every year when the state puts money into it, there is the assumption, because of the design of the system, that the local government is going to put additional funding into it, being the local school district. And you all have heard us talk about the 70-30 theoretical financing structure, that we're supposed to provide, in theory, 30 cents for every 70 cents the state puts into it. And so there has to be some mechanism locally to provide that additional money. So every time there's an increase, there is a corresponding expectation that there is an increase at the local level. And the mechanism for that, for good or for bad, is local property tax. And it now falls on those of us who own vehicles, or a boat, or a motorcycle, and for those who own businesses, because of the removal of owner-occupied residences from that tax calculation. So I view this as an investment, and if we want to continue to ensure that Greenville is the type of community that I think we all believe it is and that we all want it to be, we have to continue to invest in public education.
And I agree, but it seems like when I'm talking to my constituents, all they seem to hear about in the media are the negatives and the things that are occurring that aren't success stories. And I try to explain just as you have, and sometimes it's a very difficult conversation. But with that being said, what do I say to my constituents who ask why other local governments like the city and the county, why they don't raise taxes every year?
You know, I think two big points to make about that would be, first, they're all continuing to benefit from owner-occupied homes being taxed for their purposes. So as we, sometimes say to our friends in the municipal government and in county government, man, all that residential development, that's great. They're all excited about that. The fact of the matter is, for the school district, we're excited about growth as well. But that growth for us is a financial liability, not a financial benefit. Because if you look back 10 years, the growth of our general fund budget, 10 years, the top categories are unfunded, underfunded mandates, followed by salary increases for employees that over a 10-year period have just kept even with inflation. Nobody's really making any more money. They're just staying even with inflation. And the third highest expenditure is personnel for growth. And those are the teachers and the support personnel necessary for our students to continue to have the same kind of people-teacher ratio they have, to have nurses, to have media specialists, to have counselors, to have support personnel. The other big thing that affects school districts that does not affect a single municipality or county government, no one at the state level tells the city, the county, how much to pay people and when to give them a pay raise. And every year, because of the structure of public education, and this is not being critical of that structure, it's simply the way it is, the state of South Carolina says you're going to raise teacher pay by this amount. You're going to give every teacher a step. This year, a step and 1%. No one mandates the pay for any employee at the municipal or the county level of which I'm aware. They pay their employees what they have the ability and the desire to pay them. They also, what people don't often talk about, sometimes our in cities and counties don't necessarily talk about this, they have fees that they impose. And while they may not approve a tax millage increase on property, they may impose additional or new fees. So I think those are all points to be made, not being critical of them, just pointing out those differences that we operate under and the requirements that we may face that they don't have. And one of the biggest ones is, every year the state of South Carolina says you're going to raise the pay for these 6,000 of your employees, because we have about 6,000 teachers. So I think those are important points to be made.
And I always explain to my constituents that these are mandates given to us by the state when they mandate that we increase teacher salaries by 2% and then an additional 1% this year, but they don't follow through every year by doing what they say we're going to do, which means funding these mandates. They don't continue to fund them. But I do have a question, just as it was last year, because, and I'd like for you to explain this, and I brought this up at the last reading, where we approved a budget that had the $3 million in there for the increase in salaries. And then the state came back and they gave us a percentage of that. But we'd already approved our budget. So what did we do with that money?
We brought the budget back to you, and you amended the budget. What was the amount and the reason, Mr. Knotts?
For FY18,
Yes.
that pertain to the pension? Where they changed how the state changed how they were funding the pension for FY18. So that's why we came back to the board to revise the general fund budget.
Okay. And it is my understanding that the budget has not been approved by the state yet.
That is correct, and in fact, that is fairly common that we approve. We ask you all to approve our budget before the state approves theirs. In fact, that's what's happened in 7 of the last 8 years.
Right.
And only 1 year in those 8 years have we had to come back and amend the budget. It actually was amended to the good of the district, for lack of a better term.
Okay. And Mr. Knox, or would you like for me to address you and then you address Mr. Knox?
Go right ahead.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Knox, you know I'm going to hound you on these cars because that's what I do. Now, I'm looking at your Honda 2006, and you say usually people, that's the average there. But when I'm looking at my 2004 cars, and I'm looking at this increase, I'd like for you to tell me that 2006 Honda, what is the tax that the district is receiving? I understand what the percentage of the 76 cents annually means, but how much other are we getting?
If the board does approve the 5.1 mil increase, the 2006 Honda would give us $21.62
Okay.
total property tax for Greenville County Schools.
Okay, so that's where my discrepancy is, because my taxes on a 2004, and let me get it. This time I actually brought it. Aren't you proud of me, Jeff? On a Ford T-Bird that is probably not even running at this point is $84.04. Now, I understand you're thinking, well, that's that the school district's getting, not the total tax on the car. So that is almost more than triple than what you're saying on that little Honda. So and that's going to be a recurring type tax, which just keeps adding and adding and adding. So I just want to compare. I mean, it looks great when you're showing me a 2004 Honda Accord, and it's only a 76 cents annual fee on it. But I like to know I always look at the big picture. So, yeah, if that's a $21, and you're saying, well, Linda, that's only $88 that you're paying. But when you've got multiple cars, it starts adding up, just like it does for small businesses. And that's what I'm dealing with this past weekend when I was at the Greek Festival, and I had so many people coming, please don't raise my taxes because my restaurant, I'm barely making it as it is. By paying minimum wage for this, you know, I don't have 4 floors people coming to me. But, and I do want you to keep giving us flowers so I can give them away, Debbie. But I'm just trying to understand, because when you go to these drive-ins that are just trying to make it, it's very difficult for them to keep paying. They're the ones that keep getting hit year after year after year. Just as Dr. Royster stated, the homeowners are not. It's the small businesses that are getting drilled. And so how do I answer them? How do I answer them, Jeff? When I vote for, I'm like Mr. Suddeth, we can do the 3.25, but now we're going to lose it. But then we have this 1.6 mil that we need to add to it, and they're saying, but Linda, you know, we got kids that are working for us in high school. We got kids that are working for us when they get out of high school. You know, we're trying to help everyone. Help me, help them, help others, and then help me to understand this. So, do you want to answer that?
Well, you know, beyond what I've already said, and to simply repeat some of that, ensuring that we have a quality educational system and a quality public school system has a price tag. And we try to be very conservative in what we recommend to you all, what we ask for. We have a system that we have to operate within. We didn't design the system, but we have to operate within it. So the place that we have to go to secure additional funding locally are to those individuals that own vehicles and to those individuals that own businesses. Now, those are the same businesses that benefit from having an educated workforce. So the opportunities that we provide to the students within the school system every day ultimately translate into a more educated workforce for those same businesses. They also translate into a more educated workforce qualifying for better paying jobs. The better paying jobs that they have, the more disposable income they have, the more opportunity they have to eat out or to buy flowers or to purchase anything from the small businesses in our community and the large businesses, because it's not just small businesses, it's our large business and industry, whether they're paying on an established tax rate or they're paying a fee in lieu of taxes. So, you know, perhaps it's not the system any of us would have designed as far as funding, because it doesn't ensure that equitably everyone pays a portion. But it's the system that we have to work within. And that's why we try to always be very conservative in what we ask for. And everything in this budget goes back to either helping to ensure we have quality personnel in the classroom and supporting the classroom, or doing everything that we believe we can reasonably do to ensure that our students are as safe and secure as they can possibly be.
Okay. Well, I totally agree with the safety. I hope our teachers understand that 5%, some teachers will get 5% increase. And there are many people in this county, as well as state, that barely get a 1 or 2%.
I'm not sure we hit 5%. We come in about 4 point.
2 to 4. The max is 4.
4.24?
No, 2, the range is 2 to 4.
2 to 4%? Because they're going to get 2%, and then the state is mandating.
They're going to get a 1% applied to the step they're on.
Which would be?
And they move a step. The steps are unequal. And we've recommended a 2% for those that wouldn't get a step. Mm-hmm. So what that translates to is the lowest a teacher would get is 2%, which is equal to what everyone else is recommended for. Okay. The highest they could get would be 4%.
4.24%.
4%. Flat 4.
Okay, so.
And the average is 3.29% for a teacher, the average.
average. So I apologize for giving them an extra percentage because we certainly couldn't afford that millage increase. But still, with that being said, there are many people in this state that some don't even get a cost of living increase, much less an increase. So with this 2% or 4%, whatever they may receive, I think that's great. But I still have. I will defer until later. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Leventis Wells. Do I have another board member who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Ms. Roletter?
Sorry, I've been taking notes. On page 9, under guidance counselors, middle and high school, I understand we need to move from a ratio of 300 to 1 to 250 to 1. It actually needs to be more than that, but that's a realistic goal where we can start. And that's over 2 years. We certainly need an additional 12.0 FTEs. There are not a sufficient number of qualified candidates this year to fill the 26.5 FTEs needed to meet the 250.1, and that's going to get worse because of teacher loss. And that is because of teacher pay. And that is because our legislature has not fully funded us as they should have for years. Point 1. Page 10. Band instrument repair. Let me preface this by saying, although my husband does work for a music company, he gets no kickback from this. This is not how he's paid. He does something else. But I do know a little bit about band instrument repair because he works for this music company. We need to increase the amount of music for band instrument repair because our 52% poverty rate precludes students who want to be in band from participating. We have a 50, is that correct, Dr. Royster? Is it 52%?
It's right at 52% for any reduced meal status, poverty status. They've changed the way they calculate that, but about 52%.
Thank you. Our 52% poverty rate precludes students in poverty who want to be in band from participating. They don't have the money. They don't even have the money to rent instruments. Not even cheap instruments that won't even play well. What really should happen is $5,000 should not even be considered for band instrument repair, and that's what's recommended. The minimum needed is $750 for middle school and $1,000 per high school. The average playing condition repair of $75 is $75 per instrument. High schools use more expensive and larger instruments plus more high school-owned instruments like they use in marching band, hence the higher cost for high schools. We are severely underfunding our bands, and I think that Ms. Wells, who has always supported our bands, and we've been together to band exhibitions, and as we all know on this board, music, extracurriculars like music and speech and debate light up brains. Academically, they light up brains. I realize that this probably won't happen, not this year, but if we don't do something about significantly increasing what we allocate for band instrument repair, more and more children will not be able to participate. We're losing more and more teachers. Poverty rates are not going to get any better. And I cannot advocate any more strongly than this for our children. That's all I have to say for this time. I will defer my time for later. Thank you, Dr. Ball O'Connor.
Thank you, Ms. Rolletta. Ms. Wells?
Thank you. Somebody mentioned earlier the state budget and the fact that we don't have a state budget approved yet. Do we have an update on what we think is going to happen with conference committee in terms of the funding?
Mr. Royster?
Ms. Morris can come forward and speak to that. We really don't have any hesitancy to bring this recommendation tonight based on past experience with what the legislature ends up doing once they get to conference committee. But Ms. Mills, if you'd share what you know of the current status.
The conference committee adjourned last week and said they will not come back into session until, well, they don't plan to bring, the budget forward to the full committee until not when they come back this time, but when they come back June 26th, I believe is the date that they'll come back. So they won't take up the budget until June 26th. They'll have the conference report ready at that time.
Right. So right now the difference between the House and Senate versions looks like what?
It is overall. It's an amount that we could come back and amend if we had to at that time, if there were changes depending on which ways they went. There's revenue on some side, there's expenditures on other sides. Depending on how they did, we believe at this point that it would be manageable for us to come back and ask for an amendment at that point.
Okay. And our budget is based on which numbers?
We use the Senate version. We believe it's the one most likely to prevail. It has a little more favorable revenue. It has a 1% teacher increase to the schedule as opposed to 2%. We believe that if there's a difference, it is not, to use Jeff's term, it wouldn't be a material difference. We'd simply come back to you and amend the budget. We would not come back and amend it requesting a greater tax increase if there were additional revenue needed, but we don't think that's likely.
Okay. So when we look at the millage that we have available, numbers we get, can you walk me through how the South Carolina Revenue Office, I know we've talked about there are two components, it's the CPI and the population growth. Can you walk me through how they calculate that? Do they take just the CPI percentage? That's the way it reads in our notes.
Yes, ma'am. What they do, they got consumer price index is 2.13%. The state of population growth in Greenville County for the past year has been 1.54%. They add those two numbers together to get 3.67%.
And when they translate that into a mill, they use our current mill value. They use what?
Then it's 3.67% times 139.7 mills, and that's how you get the new millage rate, the potential new millage rate.
Okay. And how do things like TIF payments and FILOs and those things, because those aren't in the basis for the mill calculation, right? For the mill value calculation.
That's correct.
So those are just kind of off to that's kind of an extra different revenue source that doesn't really calculate into that what that millage increase.
That's right, because it's not calculated. The amount assessed to those industries is not calculated on the mill value. It's a straight out negotiated fee. And that's why we show that as a separate revenue line item.
Okay. So in that way, that projection could be a little high in terms of what we might need for population and CPI
it's a look back, so it could be high or low. You know, the population for the coming year could be greater or lesser. Inflation for the coming year could be greater or lesser. So it's just like so many other things, it's an estimate. That's why we try to be conservative on estimating expense, and why we try to be conservative on estimating revenue increase, though we have for several years recognized additional local revenue. And again, going back to a point that was made earlier, a percent generates several $1 million to us, but 1% is very close. Obviously, it's very close to 100%, and we just don't want to go over. We want to be very, as we have traditionally been, very cautious in how we estimate revenue. Realizing that it does improve. Now, we've cautioned the board several times in the last several years, and it appears that has at least partially come to pass this year. It seemed like car revenue just kept going up. Well, at some point, we felt like, well, surely people are going to stop buying new cars. And we have begun to see that trend this year. Now, fortunately, in the second part of the year, we got some additional local revenue that seemed to somewhat mitigate that loss. But we suspect that's going to continue to be a loss, because I just don't think new cars are selling as they did in the last 3 or 4 years.
Okay. But we're still seeing significant growth in the economy from a business standpoint.
We are seeing significant growth in the economy. We are seeing some growth in our mill value, and we've seen some growth in our fee in lieu of, which we've recognized this year in the budget.
Have we had, or when would we have last had any sort of adjustment on our millage rate? Don't they do that periodically?
Every 5 years.
Yes,
Last year
it was the summer of 2015. The next one will be the summer of 2020.
Okay, so they make that adjustment to bring the millage rate in line based on what the
to ensure that in that coming year, whatever year that is, that in the coming year your millage brings in no more than it brought in the year before. So in 2015, that would have been the action that would have happened, and it would have brought in, using the auditor's judgment, the millage would have been brought down to the point that he believed it equaled the revenue we received the year before. Dead even, no growth at all.
Okay. So I have 2 kind of specific questions. One on page 6. We've got the $2.4 million for special education personnel, and we said that was to offset previous state and federal allocations. What were the specific services tied? I mean, I guess what was that funding source, or what was the funding purpose? What strings were attached to that we're going to fund now out of the general fund instead of those special revenue funds?
This is basically federal.
Okay.
And what we've done over the last several years, we've received a supplement, and we've stretched it out as long as we can. But basically, this is funding existing teachers, aides, staff that are funded in IDEA, because that funding has been reduced, held stagnant and reduced related to the supplements over the last several years.
Okay, so it didn't have anything more specific that it was tied to other than just IDEA money, right?
Yes.
Okay. And on page 7, we have the increases associated with student growth. We have $1.5 million for additional staff. Do we have a specific breakdown? I know we list CTE teachers and special ed teachers in addition to regular teachers. Do we have a breakdown?
It's a combination of what we've already allocated on baselines plus what we are projecting through count to fully staff and keep our schools at the ratios and levels that they are.
Okay, so the CTE, it mentions CTE to meet program requests. Are those new? Are those some of our new programs, or?
No, it would be how we currently staff. If we had an increase in population and need additional special ed teachers, additional CTE teachers, additional regular ratio teachers. It's for all of those related to our growth and our student bubbles where they show up.
So So do you do a projection on specific staff, or you're saying you're doing this as a...
When we put the personnel baselines out, what we use is we use the board-approved formulas.
Right.
And we run those with the enrollment projections that we get, and that's what we actually put on the baselines.
And then we constantly restaff that all the way up to the beginning of the school year.
Okay. Well, the one thing I appreciate in this budget is that even though we only had one person come and speak tonight about our budget, we heard from a lot of people that came to our community meetings when we talked about the strategic ed plan, and they talked about what they thought we needed, what we did well, what we needed to do better. And we have several items in the budget specifically kind of related to special ed services. I like that we're continuing to try to move services for special education students back to their home-based schools, because I think that's important to families, the therapist. So I appreciate that the things we put in the budget are things that we have heard from the community a resounding need for. And I think when you are in a position where you have to look at how you spend your budget and how you move your money and how to best meet the needs of the public, that's the right thing to do. I'm a little conflicted about what we say about other governments. I have heard from county council members, friends who like it when I don't vote for the budget and don't like it if I do from a millage increase standpoint. But to your point, Dr. Royster, there are a lot of fees associated with county and city services that go up every year. And I guess if one way we could cover ourselves is we could just start charging our families some fees and charging the public some fees for every career center student we put out, or every college graduate, every college ready student that we put out, and see if we could generate some funding that way. But I'm not sure people would like that too good.
Well, I guess that that's in essence what we do by the modest tax increase we ask for, is that we're spreading that within our ability to do so, within the board's ability to do so, spreading it throughout the community, because the community in general benefits from the educated population. And I do think that one of the most significant differences between cities, counties, and school districts, beyond their ability to levy those fees, is there is no one directing that you increase the wages of 60% of your workforce by X amount of dollars every year. That's a pretty significant difference in the systems.
I think if we were trying to take all the millage that we've calculated to be allowed to take, I would have a lot more concern with this budget. But I think you always bring us a fairly conservative budget, and you try your best to make those numbers work. And again, because I see things that we need if we're going to continue to serve our students, I'm fairly comfortable with this budget. With regard to the fund balance and what we have left over and what we spend, I do think one thing I would maybe like to see us consider is when we have fund balance left over in our operating fund every year, perhaps if we had a mechanism to always then take that fund balance and apply it to our debt service fund, our capital fund, so that we're offsetting any potential need to increase millage on that side. Maybe that would be something that, as a board, some of us might be more comfortable with that idea, because we know we have capital needs and we've identified them, and they're going to be funded through debt service. So if we went to that capital fund and said, okay, anything left over we use toward capital investment, and maybe that's the offset in the need to raise taxes. And I think to some extent, I can't remember the amount, but that was some of that $6 million we spent was in part things that we had said we were going to do from a security standpoint, but we were doing it over a 3-year time period. Correct me if I'm saying any of this, if I'm inaccurate, but a significant portion of that were things that we had identified that we were going to do, and because of the tenor of response we got from the community and their concerns, we used the fund balance to accelerate what was in the capital fund, right?
Yes, some of it was to accelerate projects that we already had online, and some was to do some projects that weren't yet there. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but and Jeff may or may not have them with him. But you'll recall over the last 3 or 4 years, we have requested and the board has approved setting aside general fund balance for us to use specifically for FF&E for new building projects, which then reduces the demand on the GEO bond levy. So we have done that. And I think, as we'd already noted, we've also, every time we get budget requests, when we look at those things and they involve one-time what would be capital expenses for equipment and that sort of thing, instead of bringing them to you in the general fund budget, we've tried to move those over onto the capital side in some cases, but more importantly, we've tried to utilize fund balance to address those, knowing that they were non-recurring budgetary items.
Well, I've said it before, and I will say it again, that even though we all find taxes distasteful, I think more than any other infrastructure that need you have, whether it's roads, water, sewer, any of those things, what we do is significantly more important and more crucial to any other service provided by the government. So thank you for your hard work and your continued effort to bring us something we can move forward with.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wells. Next is Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell.
Thank you, Dr. Ball O'Connor. I have a couple of questions about the special ed allocations. Dr. Royster.
Yes, ma'am.
I know last year we did we increased the funding to special ed last year for basically the same thing. Did we not have the services in the home-based schools? We increased it by 5 FTEs. Last year it was called special education teachers for changing school assignment, but this year is special education teachers moving classes to home-based schools. Did we not have any of these services in the home-based schools before last year?
We have some services in home-based schools, but not the ones that are reflected in this movement of these 10 additional positions. I mean,
okay, it was 5 last year and 10 this year.
And as part of our attempt to, number one, reduce bus ride time for special needs students. Secondly, to put them in their home-based school where at all possible, because that puts them with students that they perhaps later will be in school with, and they're students that, generally speaking, are from the same neighborhood. And the third aspect is where they have siblings, that enables them to be in the same school with their sibling, which is obviously a much greater convenience to their parents, allows their parents to be more engaged at the school with all of their children, as opposed to perhaps having to sometimes make some choices about where they might engage, given the amount of time they have to do so.
Now, is there a report of how many special education students that we serve?
Yes, ma'am. We serve, I believe, around slightly under 12,000 special needs students. I want to say 11,880, but I think it's right around 12,000.
Is there like a 3-year report as to how many we served this year, last year, and the year before?
We can provide that for you.
Can I would like to request that. But I also wanted to ask, I guess, Ms. Hogan, the curriculum. Is this going to be a new curriculum that we're paying for special ed? I see $300,000 for curriculum and professional development.
Are you on the social emotional curriculum?
It says special education.
I believe those are consumable instructional items that were paid for out of the IDEA maintenance of effort money that we're no longer receiving. Ms.
That's
Hogan?
correct. We did a bulk purchase with the maintenance of effort money that we bought last year, and these are the consumables to replace those things.
And then there's the professional development training there. We've got the credential. We're going to do curriculum for that. That would be new that we would be writing for the credential that the state passed this past year that we've talked about this year, that will start with the freshman class.
So that's not new curriculum. It's been here in the district for a while. Is this the scripted curriculum that special ed uses?
The first part of that is not new. The second part is new because that's the curriculum to carry out the new employability credential that the state just approved. So we did not have curriculum for that. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last question you asked, Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell.
I asked if that was the same, if that's still the same curriculum where that is scripted.
The curriculum that we purchased this past year through the maintenance of effort money, many of those are some scripted pieces. We had elementary, middle, and high that have scripted portions of their curriculum, like Inspire and in Read 180 in those programs. There are scripted portions of that, if that's what you're referring to. This would be for the consumables for those to continue those. So yes, ma'am.
Okay. That's all I have for special education. Now, I wanted to ask about the CATE, the teacher work experience compensation. Is that like a stipend for these teachers, or is that going to be part of their salary?
No, ma'am, that will become part of their salary. It will be how their salary is calculated. And I guess sort of a simple example would be if we hire a welding instructor, first year working with us as a teacher. Mm-hmm. Right now, no matter how many years that person worked in industry, they come in at 0 years experience.
Right.
What this does is if they had 5 years experience in industry, they would come in at 5 years experience instead of 0. Just like a teacher coming to us from another district, if they had 5 years experience in another district, they'd get 5 years experience for pay purposes in our district. That's the way that the surrounding districts are paying their career and technical instructors, and we have not traditionally been doing that. So it puts us in a position where we are nowhere near competitive with them. In fact, I think we have an example, Brooks, where we lost a teacher for there was about a $9,000 pay difference for a teacher to go to an adjoining school district to teach exactly the same subject in exactly the same setting, possibly with the same number of students.
So this is basically going to be putting them in line with other districts?
Yes, ma'am.
In order for us to keep them?
Right. Treating them for pay purposes the way other districts are treating similar employees.
Okay. All right, that's all I have. Dr. Paula.
Thank you, Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell. Next, Mr. Meek.
Thank you, Dr. Ball O'Connor. I'm going to give you all a little history lesson, if Jeff will help me. Back in, well, tell me what a 10 is, Jeff. Yes, sir.
A tax anticipation note. If you issue a 10 when you have cash flow needs that your current cash flow does not fund.
When's the last time we had a 10?
I've been here since June 2002. We have not issued a 10 since I've been here. I'm not sure when it was done before I came here. So it's been at least 16 years.
Okay. Well, what's the reason we don't have it issued a 10?
The board's foresight to mandate a fund balance. The board policy requires 8.33. And also the fund balance as a whole carries us through the lean time period of the year in the fall, which we were excited to show you that new graph that showed you the actual fund balance dipping down into the board required amount for about 15, 20 days in the course of November. With that allows us basically to avoid issuing a TAN, a tax anticipation note.
Okay. I recall when I first got on the board a couple of years ago, that 1994, 1995, we had a $3-point-something million reserve fund. And I remember one of the schools up in the Marietta district, the roof fell in and we had to go in and replace the roof, and you know, it's there for a reason. We were continuously borrowing TANs, and we spent millions and millions of dollars on interest that no one benefited from except the lending institutions. So that's the reason I think we had it one time, it was a 5% reserve fund was the cap for the board, and then it went to 8-something.
8.33, yes, sir.
And I think the experts to be thinks it ought to be higher than that, don't they?
They're saying between now between 17 and 19%.
And the reason to keep that is in case there is an emergency with the funds that we receive or the taxes don't come in or whatever to take care of, so that we do not have to borrow the money, if I remember correctly.
Yes, sir. I guess we all went through the perfect example of that back in the FY9, FY10 school year, when over a 2.5, 3-year period, we had state cuts of close to $75 million. And when the board came back and assigned usage of the fund balance, allowed the district to make measured and thought out adjustments to the budget instead of having to take knee-jerk reactions during the course of the school year.
And how many people did we lay off at that time?
Zero.
Okay.
And no, we didn't lay anyone off. No one lost their job. Some people got a different job. No one lost their job, nor did we have to furlough employees where they lost wages for days they would ordinarily have worked. And to your point, Mr. Meek, and to Mr. Knott's point, it did allow for a very measured and planned approach to step down dealing with the loss of this very significant loss of revenue, because I think it's $72 million over a 3-year period. But having that fund balance there allowed for it to be done on a planned basis that helped to protect our employees as best we could possibly protect them.
Okay. And as most of you know, I have been interested in the fund balance for the last 20 years, and I think it's very important as we have seen and have used it correctly. Also, I know that someone was maybe interested in taking the 1.6 mil out of the fund balance, and if we took it out this year, it not only comes out this year, but it comes out next year and the next year and the next year. Time to take my medicine, sorry. Y'all can wait. Anyway, it continues that at some point in time, if we want to expend that money on salaries or whatever it may be, we will have to include that in our operating costs, which we would have to vote to increase. So if we tried to take it out of the fund balance, and I know on some items such as the safety that we've recently taken out, I'm all for it. I think that there's quite a number of other things that the district should look at in safety, and hopefully they are, and we'll bring those back to us sometime in the future as promised. And I think that safety is a very important matter to many people throughout Greenville County and throughout the state and throughout the nation. And I think that we would be derelict in our duty if we didn't look at every possible idea. I don't want to say that we should have a fortified with only 2 entrances and every teacher carrying a gun, but I think that we need to look at all our options and that can be out there. So I am going to support this 5.1 millage increase. Thank you.
Okay, are there other board members who have not spoken who would like to? Ms. Bush and then Mr. Lewis.
I was just going to do a little bit of history too on the prior to Act 388, since Roger's already taken us down memory lane. Prior to Act 388, when I first came on this board, we did this all completely different, because the county auditor was the one that imposed the formula that we have to impose now. The county auditor added that. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am, you are. It was called the EIA Required Local Effort.
Okay. So the county auditor would have been responsible prior to Act 388, if we were doing this budget, the county auditor would be responsible for the 5.1 mills right now, right?
Well,
Whatever that came to based on the formula as it was then.
Okay.
that formula, and that goes back to, I mentioned earlier, the whole construction of school finance in the state is predicated on this 70-30 split. That was supposed to be the average throughout the state. The state provides 70%, local district 30%, based on the local district's ability to pay, as determined by the total value of assessed property in the county. That was all assessed property: cars, trucks, boats, houses, businesses, all assessed property. We happen to be right about on that 70-30. That formula still exists. That's the entire structure of EFA, which is the predominant funding source for schools in the state. It's this 70-30. So if we are, and I believe we're right now, we're at 72-28, Jeff?
Yes, sir.
So there would have been a calculation this year, if we were back in those times, there would have been a calculation that would have said, you must increase locally this amount of millage in order to meet your increased obligation for the 28%. Because the state would have put more money on the 72% side, and the district would have been required to increase its local contribution, hence that phrase, maintenance of local effort. It might have been 5.1, it might have been 6, it might have been 3.2, but it would have been directly tied to the increase from the state to ensure that the other side of that local funding, or the local funding side of the total funding, was there. So that's a good point to be made. And the structure still exists, even though owner-occupied houses are no longer included in the formula.
And then the board had 4 meals. The board was limited to 4 meals.
Yes, ma'am. It's called Act 602.
So at that point, and I will just take the general that we figured it this year, if the county had to assess a 5.1% increase, and then the board had taken, because we went many times to Columbia to lobby, because there were districts throughout the state, there were some districts that had no limit at what they could look at what their needs were, and we were limited at 4 meals that time, the Greenville, by our legislators, we were limited at 4 meals, and we just took that 4 meals every year because it helped support our magnet schools, Roper Mountains, all of the other things that we felt our community wanted us to support and provide throughout our community. So if we had that 4 meals this year, and then the 5.1 that structure at that time said the county auditor has to maintain, and Act 388 essentially took that out of the county's hand and said, now you have to maintain it as a school board. You have to be able to keep up with that formula. That would have been that would put us into a 9.1 meal increase, which is far more now than what we were doing years ago. And then I just wanted to make the point that even by the formula that we have now, after Act 388, how much millage were we allowed this year? How much, if we had just said, we have needs, we want to decrease class size, we want to make our schools safer, we want to add more resource officers to all of our elementary schools, and we said we feel incumbent upon us to take what the law says that we should use to operate. And what would that be?
The maximum you could do is 15.2 mils.
15.2 mils.
The formula for this year for FY19 is 5.1, but the board had 10.1 mils of leftover from prior years that the board has not levied.
So we could have done 15.2, and we're asking for 5.1, which is basically that maintenance of effort for us to balance our side and provide our local tax. So I would say probably in anybody's calculations that a conservative estimate of what we ask for from the community to support the type of system that we provide that has caused all this growth in Greenville County. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bush. Next, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you. I just have a couple of clarifying questions. So just from a procedural perspective, we are in the second reading today. So the options before the board are that we can, currently there's no motion on the floor to accept this budget, so we've got to put a motion on the floor to do that. So the option is that we could approve the budget tonight, or what? What are the other options that are available to us?
Dr. Worcester, would you like to speak to when we could do a third reading if we were to wait for the budget to be finalized?
Your current policy allows it to be approved on second reading or any reading thereafter. Traditionally, for, probably 14 years, even before the policy changed, the board would normally approve the budget on the second reading and waive the policy, and they did it so many times that several years ago you all changed your policy to simply provide for it to be done on the second reading. The board could vote to move it out to a third reading. We don't currently have one scheduled. That would be, certainly something the board could be polled as to whether or not, they're available. There is a number requirement. I don't see where's Mr. Webb. I believe you have to have 9 members present to approve the budget, and it's by majority vote with 9 members present. As far as from the administration, in looking at that, I don't know what the board might gain by moving it out to a third reading. We think it might be likely that the legislature is not going to act until June the 27th, 28th, maybe the 29th. There's a considerable amount of work that goes into loading the budget for the current year because of the pay that takes effect immediately upon July 1. We don't believe there would be anything that we would change in our recommendation for the budget if there's any substantive change to the state revenue or state expense, which seems highly unlikely to us. So, certainly you can defer action on it. I don't see from the administration standpoint, we certainly wouldn't recommend that you do that, but certainly that's something the board can do.
I guess the question I would ask about that, though, is there's a recommendation from the administration for 5.1 mils. There are some board members who've said the 3.5 mils that could be used or lost seem like a reasonable thing to ask for. The 1.6 mils is different because it's in addition to mils we could lose. So if the board, what steps could the board take to provide action to indicate that that was the will of the board if it was? One would be that we can't approve a budget. We would either have to approve a budget and reduce it by 1.6 mils and demonstrate in the budget where those reductions would occur. Is there an option that allows the administration to hear a request for a reduction of 1.6 mils and come back with a reduction, or would the board have to do that in this room? I guess the question is, I remember last year, it's been said before, if you want to make a change to the budget, you need to tell me where you want me to cut because this is where I want to do it. I thought I remembered hearing you say at one of the earlier meetings this year, if you're uncomfortable with this millage rate, we could make those recommendations and come back to you. How procedurally, how could something like that be done?
You can do it either or two ways. But we believe very strongly that the budget that we brought to you are those items that are essential to continuing the district in the quality direction that we're moving. We believe they're essential to retaining teachers and recruiting teachers. We believe they're essential in recognizing our other employees, trying to keep them level with the rate of inflation. And the other items are predominantly directly related to what we believe is safety and security of our students and our faculty. Obviously the board, through majority vote, can direct us to remove whatever amount of expenditures in that budget, or the board itself can remove expenditures from that budget. But we provided you what we believe is the administration's best recommended budget for your consideration. Again, if it does not pass, you can direct it back to us. We can remove expenses from it. You can direct it back to us with you having removed those expenses from it, or you can follow Mr. Sutter's suggestion of taking something from fund balance, though you have our recommended path forward, and that's the budget that you have in front of you.
So I guess procedurally, I don't understand how the board could direct the superintendent to remove money from the budget without approving a changed budget. So you're saying the board could take an action today that is separate from the budget? That could, I don't know procedurally how to get from the income lines that they are here, and I'm asking the question, so if the chair has an answer.
It is my understanding that once we have a motion on the floor to approve the recommended amount, then you could make an amendment to that amount and offer specific changes in the budget to reflect that amount, or you could refer it back. But that would be like any other amendment, as I understand it, with the specificity that you choose as your amendment once there is a motion on the floor to approve this recommended budget. Mr. Webb, is that consistent with your understanding?
Yeah, this would be the outcome.
Okay.
Okay, I don't understand though how the option of an amendment would work is what I'm asking, because we have a budget that has income and expenses. If the board is going to change the income, then you'd have to change the expenses. So you'd have to right here
Yes.
in this room change that. So what I'm asking is, what is the process that would be available to us to say, we would like to change the income and we would like the administration to change the expenses?
Mr. Lewis, my understanding is that if the board is being asked to vote on an amendment, that the board would be also deciding, based on the amendment, whether they would rather accept the superintendent's amount of money and associated resources or something else. And without that something else, there's not really a way to vote other than perhaps up or down, recognizing that you would come back and make a recommendation to do something else, or that you could amend it with something specific. I would like to cut the budget by this amount, and along with it, these items. So I'm not seeing another way to do it, but I'm happy if others on the board would like to weigh in on that. But Mr. Webb has agreed that those are our options.
So it's the opinion of the chair that in order to reduce the mills from 5.1 mills to 3.5 mills, that the board member would have to recommend where in the budget that would come. He could not ask the superintendent and his staff to make that recommendation.
I believe that if you want the board to have something to vote on, that a comparison makes sense. But if you are saying that you would prefer to be able to have the option to refer it back, you could certainly make that motion as well. That would just mean the board would be agreeing to come back for a third reading and agreeing to your motion to ask the superintendent to make another round of recommendations of cuts, or you could do that yourself, or any board member here. So I think either one of those will work as a motion. Just the effect of it would probably be that the more specific you can be, the better likelihood your colleagues would understand the direction and whether they wanted to go down that path with you.
Okay. I don't have any further questions right now.
Just a moment. I have Mr. Saylors, Ms. Grayson, and Mr. Meek in that order. Okay, Mr. Saylors?
Madam Chairman, I would like to make a motion that we approve
the administration's recommendation for the fiscal year 2018-2019 budget.
Second. I have a motion and a second on the floor. Thank you. Ms. Grayson, did you want to speak?
That was it.
Okay. Mr. Meek?
That's going to be my motion, but I'll speak. Dr. Royster, if I understand correctly, this recommendation, that wasn't me. Your recommendation for the 5.1 is what you feel and the administrators feel will move this district forward and keep it on track. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If you were asked by this board to come back with 1.6 less, you would do that, yes?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any idea at this point where those cuts would be?
No, sir. I'd bring together those same people that helped to formulate that budget and see where they might recommend that those reductions be made. As you all know, we go through a rather lengthy process. This year, perhaps even more lengthy than other years, because we basically went back to a zero budget for departments and for all those things that are not formula allocation. So there's, as you can imagine, by thousands of hours of work, obviously by a whole lot of different people to come up with that thousands of hours of work that go into making those budget recommendations, and there's considerable internal discussion about those things that are most important and those things that best serve the needs of the district. You know, I think the district has, the board has available to it about 15.2 mills, and I think that we could bring forward items that would equate to 15.2 mills, and they would all be worthwhile. They would all be in keeping with the district's education plan. They would all benefit students, but we don't believe that's a reasonable request to bring forward. So what you have in front of you is what we believe, based on the time that we're in, based on the needs that we have, based on the priorities that have been set forth and the expectations that have been set forth. We believe that this is an appropriate budget, and so we bring it forward as what reflects our best thinking along those lines as our recommendation to the board.
So if I heard you correctly, if we did have a third reading without giving you direct instructions to reduce the expenses, you would come back with the same recommendation?
I'd certainly make another try at it, but if you direct me to remove 1.6 mils in expense, we'll certainly do that.
Thank you.
Ms. Leventis Wells?
How much would that 1.6 mil reduce that $27 million?
Excuse me, $2,103,000.
Okay. And that sounds reasonable to me. Thank you.
Yes. Are there any other comments or questions by board members? If not, oh, Ms. Rollletter, please excuse me.
Okay. Page 11. Bus driver compensation. Page 4, line 23. We've allocated $204,000. And I say kudos for that. We need good bus drivers. They take care of our children on the way to and from school. They need to be compensated well. And just as teachers, and finding good teachers is difficult, probably finding good bus drivers is more difficult. Is that correct, Dr. Royster?
It has been increasingly difficult the last several years, yes, ma'am.
And I think that's because bus drivers with the qualifications and the appropriate certifications can drive a dump truck and make a lot more money than having to put up with, I say put up with, I don't consider it putting up with the children, but they do. Having to put up with a busload of children who are distracting and loud and just being children. So thank you for the compensation there. I wish it could be more. Also, under the, on page 11, under the Greenville Alternate Teacher Education GATE Program, I'm glad to see a new cohort will have 25 new openings to secure teachers for critical teaching positions when teaching pathways are experiencing a dramatic decline in enrollment. Goes right along with dramatic decline in hiring teachers. So we need to do more in that GATE program. I don't know how many of my fellow trustees realize this, but during a committee meeting not too long ago, a former student of mine had told me she hated being an attorney. She's a brilliant young lady. I taught English 3 honors at Riverside. Straight A student, graduated from Sanford Law, practiced for 14 years. After the first year, hated every minute of it. Made a lot of money, but hated it. We've always been friends, and I just said, well, would you like to teach? And she nearly cried. Yes, I would love to teach. She was also a speech and debate student. And I don't know if Dr. Royster remembers this, but during that committee meeting, she sent me her resume. And he looked at me with a strange look and like, why are you sending me an attorney's resume? We have an attorney. Do you remember that, Dr. Royster? Next year, because of the PACE program, not the GATE program, but the PACE program, Melinda Powers Zeitz will be teaching history and/or political science at Hillcrest High School and tutoring speech and debate. So you just never know. It helps to know some people. So I just thought that was wonderful, and I'm glad you remembered that, Dr. Royster, because you gave me the strangest look. That's all I have for now. Probably more later. More to come. Thank you.
Mr. Sudduth?
Let me very briefly reiterate my suggestion is that we use the 3.5 mils, and because if we don't use it, we'll lose it. And since we've taken $7,185,000 out of the reserve fund, we go ahead and take $2 more million out of the reserve fund. So we're not cutting anything, as far as I'm saying. We still got the same budget. I'm just saying, instead of the taxpayers paying for it, why don't we let our school district pay for it out of the reserve fund, since we've already spent $7 million out of it, is my suggestion. And I request a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Sudduth, if you would like to make an amendment, offer an amendment.
No, ma'am.
Okay. Then do you mind if I make a comment before the vote, since I have not had that opportunity? Would that be okay? And anyone else who has not spoken and would like to? I just wanted to say that I'm very disappointed, as I have mentioned in every opportunity relating to the budget, that we're not reducing class size in this budget, especially since our teacher survey shows that teacher pay and reduced class size are most important to them and for their students. and since this board has expressed reducing class size as a priority for our students. However, I understand the reasons we want to be modest and are limiting the request to maintenance of effort in terms of growth and inflation, rather than asking for the 15.2 mills available to us. I especially appreciate the items in this budget that will support teaching excellence and increase the number of guidance counselors as we work to keep students safe through strengthening important relationships and addressing social and emotional as well as academic needs. I can offer my full support for this recommendation because the superintendent has included class size reduction and related efforts to improve early literacy and the classroom environment in our strategic education plan for the upcoming 5 years. And I thank you for getting to that as quickly as you felt was reasonable for the proper stewardship and direction of the district. Are there any other questions or comments by board members? Hearing none, we will vote on the motion on the floor, and
Roll call.
we will have a roll call, please. Ms. Stokes?
Mrs. Bush? Yes. Mrs. Goodwin Caldwell?
Yes.
Mrs. Grayson? Yes. Mrs. Leventis Wells?
No.
Mr. Lewis?
No.
Mr. Meek?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris Fair?
Yes.
Mrs. Roledder?
No.
Mr. Saylor?
Yes.
Mr. Sutton? No. Mrs. Wells? Yes. Dr. O'Connor? Yes. 8 yes, 4 no.
Madam Chairman,
And the motion carries. Mr.
do
Sailors?
we have any other business?
I do not have any on schedule.
Then I
at
make
this
a
time.
motion, we adjourn. Second.
I have a motion to adjourn and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
I'll stay with you if you'd like.
Okay.
And we are adjourned.